You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter @RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am the Jacob Valk, except no imitation. I've got to start with college basketball, but not a game that happened yesterday. There were no upsets yesterday. There were a couple games that went into overtime that probably shouldn't have, but the ranked teams won every game yesterday. Instead, I want to start with what happened at the end of Sunday's Michigan-Wisconsin game. The reason I didn't talk about it yesterday was that I wanted to wait until the punishments were issued, and I didn't want to talk about the same story twice. Wisconsin beat Michigan on Sunday 77-63. At the end of the game, Greg Gard, Wisconsin's coach, put his backups in, his walk-ons, his bench players. Give them a little bit of run at the end of the game and make sure that no one who's more important to Wisconsin's success gets hurt. And that's okay. No issue with that. But Juwan Howard kept his full court press on. Wisconsin took 2 timeouts in the last minute, including one that was used to reset the 10-second clock. If you don't know, in college basketball, you have 10 seconds to get the ball past midcourt. It's 8 seconds in the NBA, 10 seconds in college. The backups were having trouble breaking the press, so Gard called a timeout to reset the clock. Howard didn't like the fact that Gard called 2 timeouts in the last minute. And during the handshake line, things got heated. If you watch the video, it looks like Juwan Howard is talking to someone else or wants nothing to do with Greg Gard. Like, he wants to avoid Gard like the plague. Then Gard stops him. Howard then gets very animated. Coaches and players surround the two. The two of them get separated. But then Howard hits a Wisconsin assistant coach by the name of Joe Krabenhoft. So the players go at it a little bit, punches are thrown. It's a terrible scene at the end of the game. At the end of the day, the handshake line is all about sportsmanship. It's to say, hey, good game, you got the better of us here, well done. And it's also to be gracious in victory. No one likes a sore winner. You know, you can always say something like, hey, that was a good job on that pick and roll late in the game. Or you shot the lights out at the end or something like that. The handshake line is all about good sportsmanship. And Juwan Howard kind of spat in the face of that great tradition. In response to that melee, Howard was suspended for 5 games, the rest of the regular season, and he'll be fined $40,000. Greg Gard was fined $10,000, but the university is going to pay that fine. And 3 players that threw punches, Wolverines Terrence Williams and Moussa Diabate, and Badger Jacoby Neath, will be suspended for 1 game. Look, obviously, there's a lot to unpack here. I'll start with what preceded the scrum. Howard keeping the full court press on, and the walk-ons having difficulty breaking it. Look, you're down big at the end of the game, and you still have a full court press on? How many games have we seen basketball players just dribble out the clock if it's clear that the result of the game is no longer in question? If you're down by 19 with less than a minute left, the result of the game is no longer in question. You have lost. So lick your wounds and prepare for the next game. You know, let's end this as quickly as possible, and the Wolverines can get on the flight back to Michigan. The Wisconsin players can go back to their dorms or wherever they live. The fans can go home. You don't need to have a full court press on when you're down by 19 with less than a minute left. Okay, I understand you play until the end of the game, but the thing is, that's not really done in basketball. Again, if the result of the game is not in question, you'll see teams dribble the clock out. That's good sportsmanship. It's not running up the score. It's not trying to pad your stats. It's lessening the risk of injury. It's just unnecessary for Juwan Howard to do what he did. And I had no problem with Greg Gard calling his timeouts the way that he did. The first time out was to put all the walk-ons in. Now, should the walk-ons have been in earlier? Yes. But in college basketball, they wait until, like, the last possible moment to put the end of the bench players in. I don't know why. That's just the way that it's done. It's not what I would do, but like I said, more often than not, that's what you see during a blowout. Alright, so the first timeout, there's no issue. Let's look at what happened in between the first and second timeouts. You had an offensive rebound by Michigan, a foul by Wisconsin, 2 made free throws, a turnover, a layup, and then the walk-on struggled to break the press as they near the end of the 10-second clock. So what's the issue with that timeout? Seriously, settle the walk-ons down. Let them know that, hey, you're fine, don't worry about it. You'll learn from this, you'll get better, it's fine, don't worry about it. I have no issue with the second timeout. Alright, the walk-ons couldn't beat the press, so yeah, you call a timeout. Here's the thing though, the press never should have been on. Alright, you're down by that much. With less than a minute left, you do not have a full court press on. That is bad sportsmanship by Juwan Howard. That is wrong. He knows better than that. He's been involved in basketball his whole life. He should know better than that. Now, I will say this. I don't love what guard did after the end of the game. Howard wanted nothing to do with him. I don't even think he wanted to shake his hand. He just wanted to get the handshake line over and done with. So guard did kind of grab his arm and wanted to talk to him. But then Howard really got heated. Now, guard was animated too. He's not a saint in this. But at the end of the day, he didn't assault a Wolverines assistant coach. You know, it's one thing if there's going to be a heated discussion and the coaches have to be separated. That's not the best look, but okay, it's been a tough season for Michigan. You could sort of justify it as this is the culmination of a rough season. Like, everyone expected this team to go back to the big dance. Instead, you look at them now, they're 14-11. They're 8-7 in the conference. There's no way they're making March Madness. And anything less than that is a failure for Michigan. So yeah, Howard's ticked off. It's the end of another tough loss. Again, it's not the greatest look in the world, but I don't think anyone would have been too upset. Worst comes to worst, the athletic director calls him and says, hey, you can't act like that. That's just not a good look for the university. You're smarter than that. I don't think there would have been any fines. I don't think there would have been a suspension. If it had just stopped at the two coaches being separated, okay. I wouldn't be talking about this right now. But when you have a head coach striking another team's assistant coach, we now go from 0 to 100. There's no place for that whatsoever. That is 100% wrong. It's assault. It's illegal. It's out and out wrong. I understand that Howard didn't punch the guy in the face, but he did strike the guy. You know, you can't do that. And yeah, when you see someone assaults someone else in a Donnybrook, punches will fly. That's why the players did what they did. They followed the lead of the coach. At the end of the day, the coach is the leader. He sets the tone for everyone else. If he's calm, everyone else should be calm. If he's hot, everyone else is going to get hot. More often than not, you see players take their cue from the coach. That doesn't always happen. Players will get hot even when the coach is standing on the out-of-bounds line with his arms crossed, but more often than not, in a situation like that, the coach sets the tempo. Now, with that being said, Howard initially wanted nothing to do with guard. Like, he just wanted to walk right by him, maybe shake his hand. But he did not want to have a conversation with Greg Gard. It wasn't until Gard really stopped Howard in his tracks that things truly escalated. I mean, I don't blame Gard for wanting to talk to Howard. At the end of the day, what's Gard supposed to do there? If Howard's storming past him, how else are you going to get him to stop? You've got to grab his arm, slow him down, and say what you want to say. Did Gard think that it would get to that point? No, definitely not. I mean, I really have no problem with what Greg Gard did here. You want to tell me he shouldn't have grabbed Howard's arm? Again, what is he supposed to do? Alright, if he wants to say something to the opposing head coach, that's his one chance to do it. It's not like he can go in the Michigan locker room after the game. What's he gonna do? Pull a John Chaney and invade his press conference? I mean, come on. Look, Howard is within his rights to not want to talk to Greg Gard. Lord knows, we've all been in situations where someone has wanted to talk to us, but we've wanted nothing to do with them. No, I don't want to talk about this now. The thing is, though, that's your one chance if you're Greg Gard. If he lets Howard pass, when are the two of them gonna meet up again? What's Gard gonna do? Call Howard the next day? There is something to be said about a face-to-face conversation. I honestly had no problem with what Greg Gard did. And I don't have an issue with what Howard did until he struck Joe Krabenhoft. Again, if it gets heated and the coaches have to be separated, it's not the best look. But look, the Wolverines are 14-11, 8-7 in the conference. They're not making the big dance. It's a tough season for everyone. You can excuse him for getting a little animated. But when he strikes someone, and I don't care if it's another team's assistant coach, another head coach, one of his assistant coaches, a player, an opposing player, whatever, that is when you cross the line. That is 100% wrong. It brings up the question, is this punishment enough? Oh my gosh, he's suspended for the rest of the regular season. Okay, he still gets to coach in the conference tournament. At the end of the day, Juwan Howard while he is the head basketball coach at the University of Michigan, is also in a position of power in a learning institution. You know, he needs to set an example for the students. If an English professor did something like this, he wouldn't be suspended for only 5 classes. There would be more discipline. I mean, these actions are extremely unbecoming of a college faculty member. But with that being said, the reality is head coaches are treated differently than other college faculty members. You know, Juwan Howard helps to bring in a lot of money to the university. Does your average, everyday math professor do that? No. Does the biology professor do that? No. I mean, let's be fair. Juwan Howard has done a lot of good things for the University of Michigan. Was a great player there with the Fab Five. Nearly won a national title. Could have won 2, but Duke utterly destroyed them. Goes back to Michigan, leaves the NBA. People forget that. Juwan Howard was an assistant coach for the Miami Heat before he left to go back to his alma mater. And he took over during, I don't want to say a time of crisis, but one of the best coaches in the history of the university, John Beilein, had left to go to the Cavaliers. No one knew who was going to take over for Beilein. Juwan Howard comes in and rights the ship. I mean, Michigan was good his first year. They were, at worst, a bubble team before March Madness got canceled. Michigan was excellent last year. They were a 1 seed. Then they barely lost to UCLA in the Elite Eight. Like I said, everyone thought they'd be really good this year. It hasn't worked out. But I don't think anyone's gonna mistake Juwan Howard for Brian Ellerby anytime soon. You know, I've seen some people say that Michigan could use this as an excuse to fire Juwan Howard. No, I don't think they should do that. Sure, maybe it hasn't been the smoothest ride at Michigan. 2 years where they underachieved, and 1 year where they lost in the Elite Eight as the 1 seed. But overall, I don't think you could bang tables over Juwan Howard's performance. Maybe he's on the hot seat, but who are you getting to replace him? Who's better? Are you going to look to someone from a small school? You can do that, but realize Michigan values Michigan men. Juwan Howard is a Michigan man through and through. I really don't have a problem with Howard's punishment. I understand that his conduct was absolutely unacceptable, and I'm not excusing it by any stretch. But the reality is, he's a head coach, he's treated differently, he just is. We can argue whether or not he should be all we want, but that's a different argument. Again, if you want to have Howard on the hot seat entering next season, I don't have a problem with that. Just think, who's replacing him? Sadie Washington? Maybe. He's a good recruiter. But does he really excite you if you're a Michigan fan? I understand he's a current assistant coach, but again, does he really excite you? Probably not. Phil Martelli isn't going to take that job. I don't think he wants to be a head coach anymore. And Howard Isley, I don't think excites you if you're a Michigan fan. Is next year a make-or-break year for Juwan Howard? Maybe. But realize, Michigan would need to have a really good replacement lined up for him. I don't know if they do. There is a game tonight featuring two ranked teams I want to talk about. And that is Villanova versus Yukon. The big story here is that Colin Gillespie is questionable. He has an ankle injury. If he plays, I think it's a safe bet that he won't be at 100%. If he doesn't play, that doesn't bode well for the Wildcats because Gillespie is their best player. So it's going to be up to guys like Justin Moore, Jermaine Samuels, Eric Dixon, Caleb Daniels, and Brandon Slater to carry the load. Can they do that? The answer is yes. The thing is, though, I am not in love with this Nova team this year. They are probably the most undeep team that you'll see this year. And I know the opposite of deep is shallow. I'm just not sure if you can call a basketball team shallow. I've never heard that word used in a basketball context before. The point is, Nova really only has like 6 good players. Gillespie, Moore, Samuels, Dixon, Daniels, and Slater. And Jay Wright knows that because no other Wildcat is averaging 12 minutes per game this year. I mean, realistically, for Nova to win this game, Moore, Samuels, Dixon, Daniels, and Slater are going to need to play like 35 minutes. Can they do that? The answer is yes. They don't average a ton of minutes per game. But it is tough to look at a basketball team and say they're going to win if they only have like 5 good players. Meanwhile, you look at Yukon, they're a lot more well-rounded than Nova. The Huskies have a 3-headed monster of RJ Cole, Adama Sanogo, and Tyrese Martin. But they do have some really good defensive players. Isaiah Whaley is one of the best defensive players in the nation. He actually won Big East Defensive Player of the Year last year. I think he's going to be a solid NBA player. And Andre Jackson is really good at getting into the passing lanes. This is a good Yukon team. They're a well-rounded team this year. Give Dan Hurley credit. It usually takes him a year or two to really get going at a program, but once he gets going, he really elevates schools. He elevated Wagner, he elevated Rhode Island, and he's doing a really good job at Yukon also. All in all, with Gillespie not being at 100%, and Nova not having a lot of depth anyway, I'm going to go with Yukon here. This game is in Hartford. Give me the Huskies. Alright, now I'll give you some MLB Valk talk. No, the lockout isn't over yet. It seems like both sides realize that time is of the essence here if we want to have a complete season. So they are meeting more frequently. They're meeting for longer periods of time. I don't know exactly what that means, but it's better than where we were previously. Instead, I want to talk about the New York Yankees. They announced that on August 21st, which is currently set to be an afternoon game against the Blue Jays, it's a Sunday, for whatever it's worth, a 1:05 start, that they will retire Paul O'Neill's number 21. I will say this, I kind of like how they did it. On the 21st, you're retiring 21. That is pretty clever. They could have done May 21st. That's a Saturday. A 1:05 start against the White Sox, assuming the schedule doesn't change. But they went with the Sunday, later in the season. Doesn't really matter. And I'm borderline on this. You know, I understand what Paul O'Neill did for the Yankees. Truthfully, I don't remember seeing him play. His last year was 2001. I was 4 years old then. So look, I'm sure my parents propped me up in front of the TV to watch at least one game when O'Neill was in right field. But I just don't remember seeing him play. I mean, I've seen highlights. Obviously, I know the stories. I just don't remember seeing him play. The thing is, though, should O'Neill be getting his number retired? In the interest of full disclosure, I'm not a fan of his on the Yes Network. I think he's too loosey-goosey. I don't think he's as serious as you should be. I understand that there's a place for irreverence, but it seems like every inning he's trying to make jokes, and he's just not taking the game as seriously as he should. I mean, look, Paul O'Neill had a great Yankees career. Made 4 All-Star teams with him, won a batting title in '94, won 4 World Series with him. That trade, Paul O'Neill for Roberto Kelly, really started the righting of the ship. You had Bernie coming into his own. The Yankees signed Wade Boggs. They traded Jim Abbott. That '93 team really started the righting of the ship for the Yankees. That was their first over 500 team since '88. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have bad memories of those late '80s, early '90s Yankees teams. And O'Neill does have some great moments. He caught the last out in David Wells' perfect game, made a great catch to save David Cohn's perfect game, played in Game 4 of the '99 World Series right after his father died. The Yankees swept the Braves in that World Series. Incredible passion. Was never afraid to hide his emotions. He's the warrior. I remember at some games, the Yankees would play a video tribute to Paul O'Neill, and the music underneath was Scandal's song, Warrior. Great song. But we're talking about retiring a number here. Not a plaque in Monument Park. O'Neill already has a plaque in Monument Park. We're talking about elevating him from the class of people like Pope John Paul II and Mel Stottlemyre to people like Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, Mantle, and Jeter. Does Paul O'Neill deserve that? It's borderline. I'll say that. If we're going to retire O'Neill's number because of the World Series, then why not retire Hank Bauer's number? Hank Bauer won 7 World Series and was a 3-time All-Star. Frankie Crosetti won 6 World Series with the Yankees. Moore is a coach. You want me to go a little more recent? Should David Cohn have his number retired? Should Ramiro Mendoza have his number retired? I mean, these are borderline candidates here. You'd be hard-pressed to really tell me the difference between Paul O'Neill and any one of those guys I just mentioned. I mean, when you think of Paul O'Neill, do you think of him as a great player? He was really, really good. Had a career anyone would be proud of. And sure, maybe in the annals of Yankees history, he had a great career. Like I said, integral part of the Yankees righting the ship in the 90s. Iconic moments. I think every Yankees fan loves Paul O'Neill. I like Paul O'Neill. I have nothing against him. But we're talking about retiring a number. Okay, that is something that means something. That is the highest honor that any team can give a player. To make it so for time immemorial, this number will always be associated with you. And in answer to your next question, 21 actually was worn by Yankees after O'Neill. Morgan Ensberg and LaTroy Hawkins both briefly wore 21 in the '08 season. In fact, I'll even go a step further. Paul O'Neill may not even be the best player in Yankees history to wear 21. From 1938 to 1947, Spud Chandler wore 21. Spud Chandler was a 4-time All-Star, won 3 World Series, won 2 ERA titles, and in 1943, won AL MVP. Paul O'Neill never did that. You want to tell me, Jacob, that was a war-torn year? Okay, but 94 was a strike-shortened season. If you're going to put an asterisk on 43, put an asterisk on 94. At least 43, they played a full season. I mean, this is borderline. Let's be honest. And I don't like retiring numbers for borderline candidates. All due respect to Paul O'Neill. Alright, had a great career. But I don't think he should be up there with guys like Ford and Posada and Berra and Dickey. In fact, if it was up to me, we'd unretire some numbers. I know it's not going to happen. But I would unretire some numbers. I would unretire 9. Roger Maris has 9 retired because of 2 great seasons. 1960, where he won MVP and led the American League in RBIs. No one remembers that. And 61, the magical season. That's it. 2 great seasons. Maybe 3, if I'm counting 62. Maybe. Does that mean that they should retire your number? No. Let's unretire 9. I think you could unretire Reggie Jackson's number. I understand that Jackson had some great years with the Yankees. I'm not saying he didn't. But do you know how many years he played for the Yankees? 5. If we're going to retire someone's number, shouldn't they have more than 5 years with the team? I mean, Jackson had a great 4-year run with the Yankees. I don't think that means that you retire his number. And even a guy like Ron Guidry is borderline. I'm not saying that his number should be unretired, but I think if I'm going down this rabbit hole, I'll mention a borderline candidate. Only 3 20-win seasons. Had a fantastic 78 season. One of the best pitching seasons in modern baseball history. Alright, won AL Cy Young. Was the runner-up to Jim Rice in MVP voting. Great season. And he followed it up with another ERA title. The thing is, though, only 4 All-Star teams, 1 Cy Young, and 2 World Series rings. Is that enough to have your number retired? I think it's borderline. I mean, there are some players that Yankees fans have a great affinity to. Like, if you were a fan of the Yankees in the 80s, you loved Mattingly, and you loved Guidry. That does mean something. But the end of Guidry's Yankees tenure wasn't the greatest. I'm not talking about his 86 to 88 seasons. I'm talking about when he was pitching coach. The 06 Yankees really only had like 2 good starters. Chien-Ming Wang and Mike Mussina. That's it. Big reason why they lost to the Tigers in the ALDS. And 07, the star-studded pitching staff. You have Pettit coming back. Roger Clemens comes out of retirement. You still have Wang. You still have Mussina. You have Phil Hughes coming up. The Yankees underachieved tremendously. And again, lose to the Indians in 4 games in the ALDS. I think it's worth the discussion on Guidry. Let's put it this way. I feel about Guidry the same way I feel about O'Neill. Borderline candidates. It's not like the Yankees are retiring someone like A.J. Burnett or a guy like Dave Winfield. or a guy like Jason Giambi or someone like that. No, we're talking about a guy in Paul O'Neill who has a legitimate argument to getting his number retired. Would I have okayed it? I mean, he's borderline. There's a school of thought that says if someone's borderline, you don't put him into the Hall of Fame. Or if you have to think about it, you don't put him into the Hall of Fame. That same logic can hold for Yankees retired numbers. Look, I'll be there on August 21st. I'll be happy for O'Neill. He had a great Yankees career, a career anyone would be proud of. But to retire his number, that's borderline to me. And I don't think I could sign off on a borderline candidate. There were a couple deaths that I really wanted to talk about. Wanted to save it for today because I knew there wouldn't be a lot to talk about, and I was right, only 3 stories. So let's eulogize these people now. The first one is Emil Francis, who died on Saturday at the age of 95. It's okay if you don't know the name Emil Francis, unless you're a Rangers fan. Odds are you're not going to be intimately familiar with his career. But make no mistake about it, this guy is arguably the greatest coach in Rangers history. I mean, some people would say Lester Patrick, and I'd be okay with that, but Emil Francis did get more wins than Patrick. No Stanley Cups, that does mean something, but more wins in a shorter period of time, that does mean something. Francis did play in the NHL a little bit. He was a goalie for the Blackhawks and Rangers, was not a particularly good one. And for a while, it looked like he was gonna just be a footnote in history. But when Francis retired, he joined the Rangers as a coach for one of their minor league teams. Then he joined the major league team as an assistant GM in 64-65. He became GM, taking over for Muzz Patrick. Then midway through his second season as Rangers GM, he fired the coach, Red Sullivan, and took over coaching duties for himself. Now look, some people in that role struggled. Mike Milbury certainly couldn't do it for the Islanders. Francis was excellent in that role. With the exception of his first year, every year that he was head coach of the Rangers, they made the playoffs. In the interest of full disclosure, I will say this. The Rangers only made one Stanley Cup final with Francis as their head coach. It was 71-72. They beat the Canadiens in the quarterfinals in 6 games. They swept the Blackhawks in the semifinals. Then they went up against the Bruins and lost in 6 games. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what the best move Francis made as GM was. He traded Larry Brown to the Red Wings for Pete Stemkowski. Stemkowski had a really good Rangers career. One of the biggest trades in hockey history. Brad Park, Jean Rattel, and Joe Zanussi for Phil Esposito and Carol Vadnais. The Bruins GM was Harry Sinden. The Rangers GM was Emil Francis. I mean, it's impossible to put into words how monumental that trade was. To this day, it's one of the biggest trades in hockey history. It was a controversial trade, but it worked out for both sides. Park and Rattel had good runs with the Bruins, but Esposito and Vadnais had good runs for the Rangers. I think it's safe to say both teams made out pretty well in that trade. He also made some really good draft picks. He drafted Dave Maloney, he drafted Ron Greschner, he drafted Steve Vickers, and he drafted Rick Middleton. Emil Francis did not trade Rick Middleton. John Ferguson did. Francis coached the Rangers nonstop from 65-66 to 74-75 with two exceptions. Bernie Geoffrion was Rangers head coach for a little bit, but he resigned midway through his first season because of health problems. And Larry Popin was Rangers coach for a little bit. Didn't do a bad job, but it was always on an interim basis. Now, one thing about Francis, he was not afraid to make a big move. Obviously, the Espo for Park and Rattel trade, but also releasing Eddie Jacquemin. One of the most controversial decisions maybe in NHL history. I mean, Jacquemin was struggling for a while. He was not the Vezina winning goalie that he once was. And the Rangers had a young goalie who they were really high on in John Davidson. So Francis decided to cut Jacquemin. Jacquemin latched on with the Red Wings. Rangers fans gave him a standing ovation. Jacquemin got misty-eyed. And some Rangers fans even chanted, "Kill the cat." Francis's nickname was the Cat. He was fired from the Rangers in January of 1976, took over the Blues and helped steady that ship. People don't remember this. The Blues were very close to moving, but Francis really helped steady the ship and helped bring in people who were dedicated to keeping the Blues in St. Louis. He is an incredibly important figure in hockey history. He was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1982, and deservedly so, if I may say. The second guy who died is Charley Taylor. He also died on Saturday at the age of 80. Charley Taylor was one of the greatest wide receivers of his era. He was right up there with Fred Biletnikoff, right up there with Don Maynard, right up there with Paul Warfield, Right up there with Bob Hayes, Lance Allworth, all those guys. He was a great, and I mean great, player. But it almost didn't happen. The Redskins took Taylor third overall out of ASU, and for his first couple years in the league, he was a running back. Now, he was a good running back, don't get me wrong. Won Rookie of the Year, made 2 Pro Bowls, but wasn't as dominant as he was as a wide receiver. When Otto Graham took over as Redskins head coach, and I don't think that's offensive because that was the team name, not the Commanders. They were the Redskins at that time. But when Otto Graham took over as Redskins head coach, he moved Taylor over to wide receiver. And that's when Taylor thrived. He led the NFL in catches in 66 and 67. Made the Pro Bowl both years. Was an All-Pro in 67. And after that, just was a steady receiver all throughout his career. Didn't matter who was throwing to him. Whether it was Sonny Jurgensen or Billy Kilmer, Taylor produced. Now, Taylor didn't make the playoffs until 1971. From 71 to 74, the Redskins were in the playoffs every year. They lost in the divisional round in 3 of those 4 years, but in 72, they made it all the way to the Super Bowl, but they were the last team that the Dolphins beat en route to their perfect season. The Dolphins won that Super Bowl 14-7. And the only reason it wasn't a shutout is because Garo Yepremian acted like an idiot. Not the end of the world, though. Like I said, the Dolphins won. At the end of the 1975 season, the Redskins played the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles won that game 26-3. But Taylor made history. He became the all-time receptions leader in that game, breaking Don Maynard's record. He'd hold that record until 1984 when Charley Joyner broke it. The list of accomplishments that Taylor has runs about a mile long. He made 5 second team All-Pros. He was an 8-time Pro Bowler. He made the NFL 1960s All-Decade Team. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1984. And had a good coaching career too. From 1981 to 1993, Taylor was the Redskins wide receivers coach. So he coached up guys like Art Monk and Charlie Brown for a little bit. And Ricky Sanders and Gary Clark. With Taylor as their wide receivers coach, the Redskins won 3 Super Bowls. They won Super Bowls 17, 22, and 26. He had an excellent career, a career anyone would be proud of. May Emil Francis and Charlie Taylor both rest in peace. Until tomorrow, I'm Jacob Valk, and always remember, If you disagree with me, you're wrong.